I'm Indrani Bagchi from the Ananta Center. Great to have you here with us today. We are beginning a series of conversations on G20, on India's G20 presidency, the issues that are important to for India's G20 presidency. Today we kick off our series with a conversation on LiFE, which is the core of the G20 conversations that has been happening. May I invite the panelists on stage, our moderator, James Abraham. Among all his other achievements, he's a trustee of the Ananta Center. Arunabha Ghosh from the CEW, director of the CEW, the best, and Nidhi Madan from Shakti Foundation. James, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, and good evening, and thank you for joining us. We're kicking off the discussion on lifestyle for the environment. This has become or it has been flagged as a key issue for the G20 conversations over the course of the year, and this is our kickoff for that conversation. LiFE, as a discussion, tries to integrate development and climate issues. Sometimes we see these things running opposed to each other. In this session, we're going to discuss this objective on how do we make our lifestyles more people and environment friendly and sustainable. It's a tall order. And I've got two fabulous discussants with me. Arunabha, who many of you know, is the founder and founder of the CEW, Council of Energy, Environment and Water. He's been leading it for many years, and it's now ranked as one of Asia's leading policy research institutions, one of the world's 20 best climate think tanks. He's an advisor to governments, industry, civil body. He advises the Sherpa track on G20. And he and CEW were recently awarded the Asia Game Changer Award. And I really like this quote when they received this award. Incredible work, which is making a real difference for India and for the planet. Welcome, Arunabha. We also have Nidhi Madan. Nidhi manages Shakti's long-term pathway and subnational actions on climate change. And she's a climate change and sustainability professional, spending over 13 years with experience in climate change adaptation, natural resource management, sustainable development, climate finance, policy research, and so on. Welcome. As we think about lifestyles for the environment, and I ask and talk to people about the fact that we all have to make changes, small changes to our lifestyles to be more climate friendly, recognizing what's happening to the world. You've seen the most recent UN reports that despite decades and decades of conversations and negotiations, our climate is not getting better. Our track to get to 1.5 degrees is a great risk, and maybe even 2 degrees is a risk. We're also seeing those when we look and seeing the real effect of that in the disasters that we see happening around us. We can't leave it to governments. We can't leave it to institutions, companies. It's a responsibility we all have to take on. However, when I raise this, I get 3 pushbacks. And I want to put this to the two of you and to all of us and in your remarks. The first pushback is awareness. Is this really my problem? And if it's my problem, what can I actually do about it? Isn't this something that people with real big money have to fix? So there's a question about awareness, personal responsibility. The second is about affordability. Whenever we talk about any climate change, climate-friendly lifestyle changes, there's always an expense involved. Some new electric car that I have to buy that's 50% more expensive than another, or so on. And the third issue is convenience. It's just really hard to find the options that I can actually use to change my lifestyle. In these 3 resistances that I hear, awareness, affordability, and convenience, I hear the underlying tones of justice. Is it my problem? Isn't it somebody else's fault? I hear questions of economics. Is it really worth it? And I hear also commercial opportunity. Wow, if we could make it convenient, it's really possible that this could become a new business opportunity. I'd like to put that to the two of you. Nidhi, if you could open us up.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, James, for having me here. I guess thanks to Ananta for this very important discussion which you are carrying out today. It's about people, power, climate action. I guess that's something it's very close to our heart, and it's a privilege to share the stage with Anurabha. So maybe I guess whatever concerns you have raised, they're I would say they're very genuine concerns, because I guess this kind of pushbacks we get, and like India has been playing a crucial role. We have got very good, uh, kind of best practices. We have maybe on the energy efficient appliances. We have got a lot of awareness. There was policy instrument. There were market. Instruments were there, so a combination was there. That is why those kind of initiative actually took a quite a big kind of hold. But these concerns are legitimate because in India, of course, like we have global north and global south, we have a urban and rural kind of divide. So urban, of course, they are the ones who are main contributor to our greenhouse gas emissions. They are the ones who are actually consuming energy, and they are the ones which needs to work a lot on their behavioral things. But of course, we have a rural population which is almost like 70% of our population, and which requires a lot of which of course they have a income of hand to mouth, and they cannot do much because since we do not have any alternative livelihood for them, we they do rely on natural resources, which are again exhaustible resources, and one cannot do anything. And of course, when it comes to behavioral changes, we need a kind of combination of policy. A market instruments is very much essential for us, because that kind of instruments, if they are there, then of course alternative livelihood opportunities can be provided to that kind of population. And another thing which is very much important is an opportunity to have the right technology. Like for example, in India, single use of plastic is successful in some areas, but in Delhi it wasn't that successful, because the main concern here was not just we had the policy, but we do not have the right market instrument and the technology, like an alternative cost effective instruments were not there. So I would say a parallel combination of market instrument, uh, policy, and also awareness generation, these kind of social instrument needs to have a balance. And since we all are researcher, we are working towards it. So I seriously feel that if we want to have good policies in place, then as researcher we can provide good data, authentic data, and it should be backed up by those kind of right set of policies, so that there should not be any maladaptation. That's something which I wanted to say. But still, I would I would like to raise this thing that we have a population of 1.4, almost 17% of the global population, and um, I mean, we can create wonders if if we have life moment in our lives as an incorporated behavior. So, and India is pioneering a model of economic development as well as decarbonization goals. So, I guess this is something which India is an opportunity time for India, and also G20 uh, presidency is there. So, yeah. Sky's the limit for us, but it's just right set of things needs to be in place. So yeah, I'll hand it over to you, James.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you, James, and thanks to the Ananta Center for kicking off the G20 series of public discussions and putting lifestyle for environment at the heart of the very first conversation. Let me start by drawing attention to the late 1970s, when there was the second oil shock. Energy prices went up in particularly in the high energy consuming countries in the developed world. And I remember, Indrani, Pramit, you'll remember President Carter suggested that we all wear jumpers. I mean, at least American citizens wear jumpers. And, it's one of the reasons I think he lost the elections, that, how dare you ask an American citizen to wear jumpers and turn down the heating. About 3 decades later, in 2012, 2011, when the Fukushima crisis happened in Japan, again, there was an energy crisis. The response was very different. The response was, why do we need to maintain air-conditioned temperatures in the office buildings at 20, 21 degrees? The ambient air conditioning temperature was raised to 27 degrees. And the whole campaign was called Cool Business, right? And suddenly the suited executive in Tokyo could show up in short shirt sleeves. Uh, and then another decade later, we have another global energy crisis, right? And I have been in hotels in Europe where during the day when they assume that I'm not in the hotel but in a meeting somewhere, the heating is completely turned off, right? And then you come to a room such as this, which perhaps does not have any kind of centralized heating at all, and we just assume that, and we come wearing sufficient layers of clothing. These different examples I'm giving you are not about finger pointing. It's about drawing attention to this issue that the climate crisis and the broader environmental crisis that we face has been suffering from a lack of agency. And as the Prime Minister said during the launch of the LiFE mission in October, he said often when it comes to these issues, the assumption is that sarkar kuch kar lega, the government will do it. And we never ask ourselves what is the individual agency around this. And it is my individual agency to decide how I clothe myself. As the Norwegians say, there's never any bad weather, there's only bad clothing. So you figure out, how you want to do, how you want to travel, how you want to live, how you want to eat. Now, all that set aside, then where does this come back to in the context of the broader G20 agenda, and why is LiFE not just an issue about the individual, but something bigger? James, you talked about awareness, affordability, and you said convenience. Let me just make it more convenient. Add a third A. Instead of convenience, I'll say access. You get access to the product that you're demanding. The awareness problem is exactly what Nidhi was saying, right? Often the information is not there. If the information is there, it's not been delivered in a good way, and that's where whether it's the information in terms of the mileage of the car, or in terms of the calories in the food you're consuming, or in the carbon content of the cotton in your shirt, those can nudge behavior. But really, it's these two other problems where we are trying to focus on, the affordability and the access or convenience. And if you think about the economic framework for how lifestyles can become a central pillar towards the sustainability challenges we face, think about how we count GDP. You'll know that tomorrow when the budget is announced. But even if you've not gone to had an economics degree, GDP is counted in a very simple way. You add up consumption expenditure, investment expenditure, government expenditure, and net exports. And now let's just say, let's count how much of consumption expenditure is on consumption of sustainable products and services. How much of investment capital expenditure by industry or by government is on sustainable infrastructure. How much of government expenditure is sustainable? How much of our net exports is sustainable? And you will get a more lifestyle-oriented GDP. So let me just give some examples, right, on how the LiFE movement is being designed around nudging individual behavior and enabling markets, so that that demand that is created from the citizen has a response then on the supply side from the market. Let's take consumption expenditure. For a country where still most people live in rural areas and there's a hand-to-mouth existence that Nidhi was referring to for many millions, food expenditure is very critical. Now, at the same time, the food expenditure, it has to be determined what is it that you're spending on. So that's where you see how this shift towards sustainable agriculture, sustainable food choices is being driven. Say the Odisha Millet Mission, for instance, now involves nearly 200,000 farmers in 19 districts. The value per hectare has doubled. The incentive the increase in income per hectare has increased by nearly $150 per hectare. But at the same time, this change in what you're consuming as a subsistence farmer is also being enabled at a market level through this massive shift towards natural farming. 16 states in India now have natural farming practices going on. In Andhra alone is the world's largest experiment on natural farming. India is promoting the International Year of Millets at the United Nations. Let's take government expenditure, right, as another example. Right? Nidhi referred to energy efficient appliances. One of the biggest uses of government expenditure was the shift towards light bulbs, LED light bulbs. So the 600 odd million, or I'm sorry, about 360 odd million LED light bulbs that were then deployed over a course of 4 or 5 years in the country did not come just from individuals purchasing. We leveraged government expenditure through advanced market commitments to offer that scale for private sector light bulb manufacturers to start making light bulbs at scale and bring down the costs. And then that cost saving was passed on to the consumer, who then bought the much lower unit price cost LED light bulb. That in and of itself is resulting in millions of tons of carbon dioxide abated and, of course, savings in electricity expenditure. I've just given 2 examples, and I can list out many more, of how once we shift away from that this is only the government's problem to first internalizing another fourth agency, I've got to do something about it. And then you structure public policy around nudging behavior, nudging consumer behavior, or in leveraging markets to respond to that changed incentive, you can end up getting lifestyle changes at scale in a manner that would not otherwise have been envisioned when you get those initial cynical responses that James referred to. So it's really about leveraging the scale dimension of lifestyle for environment, where the whole mission at the national level and the push at the G20 level comes in.
Thank you. We're going to have a quick Q&A. I have a lot of questions. I'll open it up to the audience in about 10 minutes as I just dig deeper into what Arnab and Nidhi were covering. I want to take this model that you've laid out, Arnab, about the nudging behavior to recognize that you have a responsibility, and then back that up with the technology and the scale and the economics, that there's a product and service there that people can use. Let's first a general question. We'll start with you, Nidhi. You talked about the urban and the rural, different communities, all have to live sustainable lifestyles. We were talking earlier that actually across the board, urban or rural, we're actually living extractive lifestyles. So what do you think is needed from a technology or a scale intervention by the government that at the rural or the urban, pick the area, that is not there today, that can go down the path that Arnab had said, that we can then move?
I guess what is missing is the availability of market instruments. Like, for example, if we take the rural population, I guess they are well aware of the practices, the traditional practices and all, but still they are going for fertilizer-based stuff. Is because there's a policy to promote fertilizer through the government. So natural farming, of course, Anurabha said that Andhra Pradesh is pioneering a model, but that is yet to. Here the natural farming is also not completely natural. There's still a fertilizer needed because that's not completely feasible. So I guess the right set of policy and with the right kind of incentive, so that if they are doing something right, they should be incentivized for that. So that something is required, and an alternative livelihood opportunities for them.
So Arnab, you talked about farmers getting up to almost doubling their income per hectare by adopting practices that were actually climate friendly. And we know folks who are doing biodynamic farming closer to consumption, all of this which reduces emissions and increases income. We don't seem to have enough of it. You raised this question about the government can intervene and they can bring scale. That's what Nidhi is suggesting here. Is this an opportunity?
No, absolutely. Check. I'll just use this one. Check. Absolutely. Examples, what I've tried to illustrate for you, say the LED light bulb story is one of scale. The natural farming story is a potential. In fact, at CW, not just natural farming, we mapped out about 31 different agricultural practices and systems of agriculture across the country. And only 5 of them had more than 5% of the cropped area actually being practiced. So you're absolutely right that unless the incentives are aligned towards scale, they will become islands of example rather than the norm, right? Now in agriculture, of course, there's a range of different things that have to happen. It's whether it's the kind of subsidies that are given for water or for electricity, whether how we price the procurement prices for the crops and which crops get it, but also then what kind of incentive structures do we give to the supply chain? What kind of incentive structures do we give at the retail end? So it's the food system story. In fact, we should be talking about food systems rather than just agriculture. Um, it can, instead of starting from the supply side of what the farmer is producing, let's change the demand side. If the demand changes towards more sustainable crops, more climate resilient crops, more water efficient crops, which are also happen to be more nutritious crops, then the farmers actually are very good at responding to signals. They're far better, less inertia than we do actually, because they can pick up the opportunity. So it's about thinking about the food systems as a whole. But let's come back to cities, right? What needs to happen at scale, right? Our car ownership is, I think, about little less than 20 per thousand. In the US, it's more than 1,000 per thousand, right? And I think in Europe, it is somewhere in the 800 odd per thousand. So if we aspire, or if we, even let alone aspire, just accidentally end up in an even 800 cars per thousand population, you can very well imagine what the state of our cities will be. Now, I'm one of those guilty parties who has a car. I have a hybrid car. James, you have an electric car. But still, we are part of the guilty parties, right? Now, the question about enabling markets is that as we move towards e-mobility, what should public policy focus on, right? Should public policy focus on how many Teslas are sold in India, or how many electric kilometers we travel? If we change it to how many electric kilometers we travel, then we see that public policy can be leveraged towards massively increasing public transport, which also happens to be electric. So last year, India did one experiment. About 5,400 odd electric buses were procured at one go, but you weren't paying for the capital cost of the bus, you were paying for the distance traveled, and the service provider was bidding on the price per kilometer delivered, right? Which allowed you to overcome the balance sheet problems that state transport undertakings have. That successful tender has now resulted in an ambition to have the next tender for 50,000 electric buses. My own organization has helped the city of Kochi develop a program in Kerala of converting about 30,000 auto rickshaws to electric autos. Not overnight, but that required not just thinking about the technology or the financing, but also engaging with the auto driver trade unions to understand their lived reality and what their concerns are going to be about incomes lost or generated and so forth. But once we start bringing public policy to these critical sort of roadblocks, then what you and I choose at a private level becomes less important when the broader market that we're enabling, it becomes much more sustainable.
Just very quickly on this, I heard there was a discussion in one of the state governments recently when they were talking about infrastructure, and the conversation was only about highways and roads, and not about footpaths and cycle paths. And just the changing the narrative of the conversation in these important rooms, I feel like could also trigger some of the changes you're talking about.
We did the largest survey of urban mobility in India. And guess what? The more than 65% of India's urban population, their primary mode of travel, the two legs, right? Next comes bicycles, then come, then come actually two-wheelers before come buses, because our bus penetration is actually very low. But if you actually look at the distance traveled, average trips are 5 kilometers to 10 kilometers. So again, taking the, people will think I'm beating up on Tesla, but our whole focus on electric vehicles has been range anxiety. Well, why should I be anxious about a range that I never actually travel? I mean, that 500 miles or 800 kilometers road trip maybe will happen once in 2 years in my life, right? So why do I need to have a battery pack? Because the battery pack's size increases, disproportionately when you're trying to increase the range of an electric vehicle. If the average distance we are traveling is 5 to 10 kilometers, even if we make it 30 kilometers per day, it's a completely different battery size. That completely different battery size makes it easier to do battery swapping, makes it easier to do faster charging, reduces the amount of critical minerals in there. That means you are digging up less mines to draw out the critical minerals. The materials required in it reduces. The car size can change. The car weight changes. That means you get even more actually out of the vehicle. So again, applying an informed awareness dimension, an informed approach to public policy with the sustainability lens, while counting the economic opportunity. None of this is actually reducing economic opportunity. It's just a different market that you're enabling. And those who tap into that market will make money. Those who don't are going to lose market share over time.
Nidhi, in the concluding part of your opening remarks, you talked about economic development and climate goals to come together, and that India, it could be an opportunity here for us in India. Do you feel that's possible? The reason I ask you with a little bit of question or skepticism is usually when I get engaged in this conversation, it's always one or the other. Our people have to grow, they have to develop, and yes, we need the right to pollute to get there. But you're suggesting that this trade-off may not exist.
So what I feel, it's possible for sure. Of course, it's difficult, it's challenging, but we did a lot of projects when people actually went back during COVID times to their origins. So we felt that, of course, people were consuming less. There were people were sitting at home, and of course, the GHG emissions were less, and clouds were, they were shining like anything. But that was one area we felt that, okay, this is possible if the economic growth is lessened. But if we incorporate green measures in the economic development, it's feasible, but it requires a lot of shift in the communication, in the policy, in the right set of instruments that we provide. So
The metrics that we measure?
Yeah. So all these.
Arunabha
factors
mentioned
are
this
important,
with the
yeah.
idea that is our GDP split by sustainability versus not. So there's a measurement question here.
Yeah. So, of course, our modeling study says that if we take green path, the GDP will not significantly increase, but what we feel that it's green measures. So that's an important aspect. Of course, it would not impact our economic development that much, but in a longer run, if we take a 2070 net zero commitment, of course, we will have more green measures as well as the development goals in place.
Wow,
In
okay.
fact.
Before I open it up to everyone, I'm going to make this next couple of questions a little bit more personal rather than policy. And I mean, there's clearly a call for innovation, markets, policy, changing metrics that you've all laid out. Let's make this personal. If I were to have to change my carbon footprint, and I've gone down this path in the last year, especially as Arunabha knows, or let's ask all of us, what is it that, of the different things I should do, what should I spend my time focusing on? And I'm vegan, so eating less meat is not an issue. I have an electric car. Apparently that's good. Not so good in India, given our power is coal. I have a home. I fly occasionally. So that's my life. Oh, and also I stopped buying clothes last year. So
You want me to say
Sure.
what would? Well, in my case, my biggest footprint is my air travel. And James knows. I mean, I can save on everything else, and one long haul flight will wipe out everything. Right. Um, so, of course, we try and think about is X travel necessary, and you optimize, etc. But the nature of my work requires me, and I'm sure it'll be applicable. So, but at the same time, yes, food choices matter a lot, significantly, which is why I started this whole conversation with food. Transport choices matter a lot. Uh, Clothing to an extent, and then ambient, buildings consume 40% of our energy. So the air conditioner setting that you're putting in, or the heating setting that you're putting in, etc., or the kinds of lights you have. Um, but then one more thing, which goes back to this life cycle analysis, is actually about material usage. And this goes back to, even if you want to, is there enough availability? So we built a new office a few months ago, and one of the metrics we had was that we have to try and upcycle all the material from our previous office, and new materials that are purchased are sustainable. And we spent weeks looking for those sustainable materials. So we use reused door frames as something. We used planters as coffee tables. All that kind of stuff happened. And then one of the biggest things that happens in an office is flooring. So we finally found, flooring, carpets like that, but we found flooring that was manufactured in a factory that ran 100% on renewables. And another kind of flooring we found which had 100% biodegradable materials. So it's understanding what is your use case, right? What is your primary day job, right? If you're a farmer, or if you are a banker, or if you are a professional, or if you are an engineer, if we can start thinking about where is my maximum footprint coming from, we'll have to deal with it. Now that brings me back to this whole issue of flights, right? Um, Now, of course, at CW, you can make it personal. Yes, but our mobility team deals with sustainable mobility for our own staff. Our waste team deals with, we count waste generated at CW every single day. Our food systems team decides on the kind of food we serve to our own staff and so forth. But I've told our modeling team, you figure out how CW can get to net zero by 2030. Right? And the primary thing there will be, how do we deal with aviation emissions? Now, I don't think by 2030 we will have sustainable aviation fuel at scale to negate those emissions, even though we are working on sustainable aviation fuels. So what kind of credible offsets will be needed will be part of that story, which brings us into very controversial territory of offsets in the first place. Well, that's another question altogether.
Thank you. Just very quickly, you had to find that company that made flooring 100% renewable. How long did it take? Was that like a quick Google search and you found it?
No, about I think it took us about 3-4 weeks to locate. Yeah,
It raises that question of access.
Access.
Yeah, thank you. Nidhi, well, what do you think about the lifestyle and where changes can?
I think to me, of course, I don't have an electric vehicle. I'm vegan and all that stuff. But yeah, I don't have an electric vehicle and I have a diesel vehicle. And I want to change it this year. I'm completing 10 years and that's a guilt. But what I feel, I still resist it, because if we want to travel to interstate, then it becomes little problematic, especially if you're traveling to Jaipur where the roads are not that great. So it becomes a little challenging with electric vehicle. You have to put down your AC, and also you cannot cross speed more than 40 until you have a Tesla. So yeah, that's something a kind of reservations I have. But yeah, we still have two cars, so maybe one can be electric. Let's see. But another aspect on the green building, like Shakti, we are working on net zero buildings. That's another concept which is coming because India is pioneering a model of green building, but net zero building is something that we want to work on, and we are doing a lot of deliberations there. So be it flooring and reuse of material, that's something a very important, and India can actually pioneer a model of that as well. So that's
Interesting. So one of the interesting things about each of us, I'm going to open it up to everyone. Each of us talked about what we had to do to reduce our carbon footprint, and it was very different. Arnaba talked about flights. Nidhi talked about her car and the choices she has to make. So I ran an experiment on myself last summer. I actually measured my carbon footprint every single day. I wrote a little piece of tech that followed me around, like your phone follows you around. And I found out that 75% of my emissions came from the fact that I run electricity at home, which seems odd, but in reflection, it's actually quite insightful. My kids have grown up, they've left, so the home is by and large empty, but there are still lights, there's still heating, there's still electricity. It shocked me. I mean, it was 75%, so my flights were not so significant, my car rides weren't significant, this was. So it changed my behavior as soon as I saw that. Lights were changed. I don't turn my air conditioning on unless it's painfully hot. I wear extra sweaters during the winter. And it's just having that stark in your face changed behavior. I'd like to open it up to all of you. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Out of the 8 billion people in the world, right, at least half of them are below the poverty line, and they hardly have any carbon footprint, right? But the whole focus seems to be on people who are actually responsible for the creating this whole mess, right? Which includes the urban population in countries like India, right? And when we are talking of solutions, again we are talking of solutions of, oh, I am a vegan and I have a Tesla vehicle, which, I mean, is it the wrong thing that we are addressing? Should we be addressing the issue of how those 4 billion people who don't have a carbon footprint can increase their carbon footprint responsibly? Okay, if we just change this whole perspective, then everything changes. Okay, like you gave an example, battery. Okay, Tesla will look at the batteries from the US perspective. There is a project right now which is in IIT Delhi. Okay, I'm associated with that, where the whole approach is exactly that India doesn't need range. India requires a different set of battery. We can have different elements which compose the battery. And we actually have a solution, right? And we are setting up a center there in IIT Delhi, in the innovation cell, and trying to bring. So now, the moment you have that battery, which can power, let's say, the cycles, the rickshaws, and even, then it flows upwards. So in the urban areas, okay, in India, you don't need a battery which has range. So you don't need to look at Tesla. Tesla should be looking at you, right? Tesla will look at you. If you have a solution, okay, like you have a solution like UPI, okay, UPI is a unique solution to India. And now the world looks at solutions like that, right? That for people who are impoverished and who don't have the resources, maybe different kind of solutions are possible, which can be created by countries like India. So we should stop following this, V2, me vegan, me electric vehicle. Your electric vehicle doesn't count. It doesn't matter. It's about the battery which you put in the rickshaw, which matters. It's the upgradation of that technology for cheap electric cars, which India can use and then export to the world. That's the way to.
Thank you. Can I get a couple more questions and then we'll answer them all together?
So, G20 summit. What can we do in the G20 that responds to what you've been talking about? As we know, the G20 incorporates hydrocarbon powers like Saudi Arabia and Russia, as well as countries on the other spectrum. So, what kind of an international agreement can we be looking for aspirationally, and what can we hope to get realistically? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Siddharth from Quest Alliance. We basically work on skilling. We've been working on skilling for the past 15 years. So we've recently started delving into green and skills related to greens, right? So for example, electric vehicle technicians, etc. And we were talking to the DGT, that's the Director General of Training, which looks at adding new trades in ITIs. And so what they were telling us was that they have started introducing courses like solar technicians, electric vehicle technicians, but there is no take up. In a course of 48, there are 7 people who are joining in, because we hear a lot of these conversations. One of the reasons that Quest wanted to look into it was, as both of you also said, that there's economic opportunities that are happening with green, right? Our hypothesis also is, even now, that there is an economic opportunity that should open up in terms of skilling. That is, the supporting ecosystem of EVs, of solar, etc. should come in, right? But we still don't see take up within the youth. And I think even though electric vehicles is a recent innovation, but solar technology in India has been here for the past 10 years. And in hilly states, I think there's huge amount of take up also. However, we're still not seeing take up within the youth in ITIs, which are the traditional sort of technician producing institution of our country, right? So my question then is that what do we do to increase take up? Is it probably an issue from the industry side, that the industry is not looking at producing enough manpower, right, to support the ecosystem? Or is it a problem of scale, that there is not enough take up, because of which students don't see a possible economic opportunity in taking up these trades?
Thank you. Let's answer those, then we'll come back to more questions. Take anyone?
Thanks. Let me start with that last question around skilling. I have a completely different experience. I was giving a lecture at IIT Madras, and a lot of the students there opt for mechanical engineering because around Chennai you have an automobile manufacturing hub. And at the end of the lecture, they came up to me. They say, we are now 4th-year students. We joined mechanical engineering. We're now trying to go into the job hiring cycle. And all these companies only want computer science engineers, right? So I understand the general point you're making. But if you actually look at where there is going to be job loss, if we take the automobile sector, we've mapped it out. There's going to be job loss in the internal combustion engine automobile sector, and there's going to be a job gain. And it's going to be broadly netted out during the course of this decade. Now, where do ITIs come in, right? Which is different from IITs, right? This is where, if you look at our solar deployment, we have, again, every 18 months, we count the number of people employed. Our latest estimate is there are 111,000 people working in large-scale solar and wind. There are more than 200,000 people working in distributed energy. That workforce will rise to over 1 million people by the end of this decade. Most of these jobs are in the construction phase, followed by the design phase. There are more women employed in the design phase than in general sort of energy sector. So the point is, as this scales up, the demand will change. Depends on, which is the region. And one of the challenges with this is that the same person can be deployed in multiple different sites. So once trained, he or she might be building a solar plant in Bikaner and then moving to a solar plant in Gujarat, rather than the local person in Gujarat getting trained. So that's why even in terms from a jobs perspective, the push for distributed energy has to be a very important part of the future of our power system. Because that actually creates more local employment and therefore the demand for the skills. But it's also actually a more resilient system than the century-old system that we have of a very linear approach towards power supply. Let me come to your question. I think while we did talk about electric vehicles, a lot of the other examples we've given were very much oriented to in line with what you're saying, right? The whole point about procurement of electric buses in India, rather than public policy is not cared over about how many electric cars are sold. The example I gave of my own institution helping to convert 30,000 rickshaws into electric rickshaws. But there is an even larger opportunity. We mapped out, again, back to distributed energy. In rural India alone, the productive use of distributed energy for income generating activities, on farm and non farm, is more than $50 billion, a market worth more than $50 billion. After doing this analysis, we decided to put it to test. So we evaluated more than 100 startups and selected 6 of them and paired up with the largest social enterprise incubator in the country, Will Grow, and CEW. We created a program called Powering Livelihoods. The idea is, how do you take these startups that are crossing the technology valley of death to help them cross the commercial valley of death, get them to about $1 million, $1.5 million of sales. It could be solar dryers, milk chillers, solar-based textile looms, solar irrigation pumps, solar-based hydroponics to make cattle fodder, which itself is, green fodder is itself a $4 billion market in the country. Based on what we've done in just 2.5 years, we've had more than 13,000 technology deployments. 80% of the beneficiaries have been women, who are basically now micro entrepreneurs. And based on this experience, Government of India is the first country in the world that has come out with a draft policy on using distributed energy for productive use. So I'm giving these examples because what you're saying is absolutely spot on. That what is our solution, our bottom-up approach towards solving our problems, that then becomes a lesson. And that goes to Pramit's question of what do we get out of G20? Because this has oil and gas producers, and it has the US, which is spending $369 billion on renewables. So where does the sweet spot come in from the point of view of lifestyle? I think, Pramit, it will come in primarily from the lens of circular economy. There are some G20 outcomes that India is envisioning that we cannot get into at this stage. That will be all revealed in the coming months. But enabling a circular economy actually then allows for different countries with very different energy systems to get into, whether it's e-waste reprocessing for critical minerals, whether it's Saudi Arabia and then becoming one of the hubs in a hub and spoke model of green hydrogen, whether it is India manufacturing something else, whether it's the whole ocean and plastics economy that kicks in. So the market rules that drive circular economy would be, if we get some success out of that, would be one way to unify what might otherwise seem very disparate entities.
I just have a limited point regarding the youth thing. So, I mean, we received a lot of requests from academic institution to help us with a policy question for the hackathons and all these stuff. So, there's a lot of momentum and interest in youth, and I echo with Anurabha. So, basically, yeah, I mean, there's huge interest, and also people are willing to take up sustainability courses. I get a lot of LinkedIn messages, what course should I opt for? Of course, this is just academic, but yeah, things are translating because there are jobs generating. So yeah, I agree to what Anurabha said. Yeah.
I had one last comment. I think, sir, you had another point about the large poor population and the fact that they have no carbon footprint. And how will they go through their own? We have to think about a low carbon pathway for them. I'll just add one. I have nothing new to add other than said exactly. I fully support that. But one piece of information to add is that population actually likely has a negative carbon footprint, not just a zero carbon footprint. They're managing farms, they're managing the large forest areas, likely tribal. And these are all natural ecosystems in which they live and grow. And that carbon sink that they are negative carbon, is actually not valued today. they're not getting an economic return on the benefit they're giving to us in sinking the carbon. So there's a really interesting opportunity to see if we can monetize that. Yeah, Matt. Yes. Can I ask any other? Sorry, did you want to?
No, I'll just actually we have got a lot of requests from Bihar government, Jharkhand government, like how to basically double the farmer income. We like people are adopting natural farming, but they're not incentivized for that. So these kind of interventions actually, we need to design right kind of market instruments so that we can do the double the farmer income. And we are actually working, Shakti is working with Jharkhand government and would like to translate into Bihar as well. And that's something would be willing to show the results in maybe the next event. Yeah.
We have time for a couple more questions. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I am R.K. Khanna, former Chief Engineer with the Central Water Commission, worked on water and environment-related issues. I've got 2 points to make. One is slightly different. Maybe you feel it is off the track. When we talk of sustainable development, we must go for integration of science and spirituality. Now people will say, how does spirituality come here? Science, we all know. During the last 14 years, I was exposed to Jainism by chance. And I found they lay stress on conservation of water resources and aparigraha, that means non-accumulation. My guru used to tell me, if you have 5 shirts, if you purchase another shirt, discard one and give it to some needy person. And quoting the famous scientist, Dr. J.C. Bose, they say that 1 drop of water contains around 38,000 biota. And because of one of the fundamental principles of Jainism, ahimsa, non-violence, there's a lot of consumption of water, standing under shower and all. That is also violence, ahimsa. So much of this stress has been laid on conservation of resources, especially water. There was a booklet they used to tell us, I will not cut green trees. I will conserve water. I will conserve power. It was amazing for the first time. So spiritual power and science have to integrate it. Science alone cannot solve the problem of health and all these things. Spirituality cannot solve the problem of food and shelter. So integration is a must. And my other point is awareness generation has been talked about. It is a must. You see, awareness generation is lacking. I have worked in the government for around 35 years. We have one of the best environmental and water acts in the world, and see the state of our environment, rivers, water body. Awareness generation, right now I'm talking about water conservation. I'm sure tap must be running at my home. And when I ask my wife, she would say, oh, maid ne khula chhod diya. But you ask the maid ko danto. Nahi, you spend your times in conferences and meetings. You are very happy. I have to look after the house. If I tell the maid not to leave the tap open, she will run away tomorrow. What I will do? So awareness generation, lot of information. I think that it cannot be overemphasized in India. Conservation of water, environment, sustainable development. That is very important. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that's actually a great closure into to our session. Thank you for that. I'm going to ask you both for a couple of quick closing comments, and then I'll close.
I guess we have a population of 1.4, which can actually create a dent and could actually make a significant change if we have behavioral changes incorporated in our daily lives. And I mean, there are some apps which actually gives you the GHG footprint. That's something we can all use and apply in our daily lives. That's something, since India has the leadership and we have some good practices, be it on green buildings or all those things, it can be replicated somewhere else also. So yeah, I agree with this is a very important topic and needs to be deliberated quite frequently. Thanks.
Thank you.
2 final thoughts. One is that as I wholly subscribe to this need for awareness generation, but we also need to generate awareness about what is happening, right, on the sustainability side, because otherwise we risk falling into a cesspool of despair when the air doesn't get cleaned up fast enough, etc. But there are many other things happening, and it's important to draw attention to that as well, because then that creates a positive, virtuous cycle of demand for more sustainable products and services. The second thing I want to say, and this perhaps goes to what the gentleman here was asking earlier, I think climate change is only the second greatest crisis facing us. The greatest crisis facing us is a lack of empathy, a lack of understanding of the lived reality of people of other colors, cultures, genders, geographies. And if we can become a little bit more aware, not just about products and services we consume, but of people around us, of communities around us, it might just actually trigger a very different approach towards how we deal with a major failure in collective action.
Thank you. Thank you both. It's been just a wonderful pleasure spending this time with you. I'll just close with one comment. I think it weaves through a lot of this conversation we've just had. The first step is always just to say, I am responsible. It's in most things, most change, that's that first step of just owning the responsibility. And from there comes everything else that we've talked about, the ability to empathize, the ability to find real solutions. And Arnab is spending weeks trying to find an alternative for the flooring. Now, by the way, his number, you can get it right away. But that's the whole idea. There is an opportunity from, as soon as we take responsibility, we create a market, right? Because we say we want to change, we want something different. As soon as we create the market, everything else will step up. That's our first step to changing ourselves to live a lifestyle that's more in line with the environment. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a good day. Thank you.